Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Cooperman, and I am the Chief Symposium Editor of the Criminal Justice Law Review at UCLA. We are so excited to have you all here for our annual symposium. We worked really hard to bring a lot of distinct voices to the table, and we hope that this can be the first step of many in discussing restorative justice more broadly in law school and beyond. As UCLA, the Criminal Justice Program, and the Criminal Justice Law Review are hosts of this event, we also would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino/Tongva peoples. We are thrilled to have so many amazing panelists speaking with us about their experiences working with and about their perspectives on restorative justice, and we can't wait to share all of this with you. In this conversation, we'll be discussing the origins of restorative justice. Be sure to come back on Friday, where we will be discussing restorative justice as an alternative to the criminal justice system. We'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, UCLA School of Law's Public Interest and Policy Program, the Promise Institute for Human Rights at UCLA School of Law, the South Carolina Restorative Justice Initiative, the Center on Negotiation and Mediation at Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, and the AOP Center for Critical Race and Nation Studies at UC Davis. Now we'd like to introduce our moderator, Alicia Virani, the Director of the Criminal Justice Program at UCLA School of Law.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Hannah Cooperman and Kevin Shang, two of our law students here, for the incredible work that they've done to bring this panel and the symposium alive. I also really want to extend a huge thank you to my restorative justice law colleagues across the country who helped us put this together, especially Aparna Polavarapu, Talia Gonzalez, Annie Booth, and Mary Louise Frampton. Thank you all so much. And my biggest thank you to our panelists who are here with us today and across our next two panels. I can't tell you how excited I am to be moderating this discussion about building communities of healing and accountability with these three incredible panelists whose everyday lives are steeped in doing just that, building the communities we wish to see in this world. We chose to open up this symposium series on the topic of building and creating because the true impact of restorative justice lies in reorienting our priorities to focus on creating connection, relationships, and supportive interdependent networks. Our second panel will focus on restorative justice interventions after harm and violence have occurred. And our third panel will engage our audience in thinking about how to incorporate restorative justice into law school classrooms, clinical teaching, and student affairs. Briefly, I'm just going to set some framing for us for these three sessions on restorative justice. I know some of you in the audience may be new to the restorative justice world, and some may be very well versed. So the term restorative justice is relatively new, but the ideas and concepts are not. They are derived from a diverse set of practices from Indigenous communities around the world, known as peacemaking, talking circles, counsel, and by many other terms and practices. Fundamentally, what we now call restorative justice is about being in right relationship with each other and ourselves. When we forget these roots of RJ, we cannot truly be practicing it in good faith. Restorative justice is a way of being. Under the restorative justice rubric, there are all sorts of skills and practices we can use and strengthen, such as nonviolent communication, active listening, storytelling, exploring our shared values, circle practice, and understanding our own approaches to dealing with conflict. These are not soft skills, but require teaching and practice in order to be present in the way we interact with each other. This means taking accountability for the small things so that we have practice if some larger harm occurs. It means giving space for people's healing. It means coming together to understand that we are all responsible for one another. Restorative justice is also a theory of justice, a theory that refuses to rely on punishment, but instead focuses on the harms, the impact of those harms, the needs that arise out of the harm, and about creating community for those needs to be met. There are many modes of practice to address harm and violence under the RJ rubric that our second panel will speak to. And finally, some have referred to restorative justice as a social movement, particularly with the renewed attention to racial violence and a call to defund the police. Many people are turning to restorative justice to consider the promise that it offers. There's also a real fear that with this attention to restorative justice, that it will be co-opted, removed from its roots, and turn into another tool of the system, punishment by another name. I'm hoping that we can get into all of these aspects with our panelists today. And so I will now introduce our panelists. Their full bios will be dropped in the chat. First, we have Sonya Shah, who has 20 years experience in social justice education, including as a facilitator of restorative justice processes in her family, community, schools, and prison settings. She is the founder of the Ahimsa Collective in Oakland, California. Then we have Malachi Scott, who is the Reentry Community Restorative Justice Coordinator for Restorative Justice for Oakland's Youth. He holds restorative circles in the Juvenile Detention Center and is helping to build a community restorative justice framework in North Oakland. And finally, we have the Honorable Robert Yazzie, who is a retired Chief Justice of the Navajo Nation. He was the Chief Justice of the Navajo Nation from 1992 through 2003. He is a visiting professor at the University of New Mexico School of Law, an adjunct professor of the Department of Criminal Justice of Northern Arizona University, and teaches Navajo law at the Navajo Technical College. Because restorative justice is so much about storytelling, I've asked each of our panelists to open up with a story to communicate the impact and power of restorative justice. And so with that, I will turn it over to you, Justice Yazzie, for your story. Oh, unmute yourself. There we go.
Yat to everybody. I'm happy to be here before you to share what I know about restorative justice, peacemaking. To me, restorative justice means that the people and not the courts own and resolve their own problems. That the Net people have practiced peacemaking from time immemorial. However, when the Europeans settled, when they came, we were forced to adopt the US style of justice system. And as such, we became disconnected to our knowledge and practice of our own ancestral fundamental law. Those laws gave us essential cultural teachings and place in daily life. In 1982, restorative justice became a national movement. The Navajo Nation revived restorative justice as practiced by our ancestors from the time of creation. What restorative justice means to us is that which means peacemaking. In 1982, a very influential Navajo leader, former Navajo Nation President Peter McDonald, highly encouraged the judges of the Navajo Nation courts to revisit the traditional Navajo method of justice because the modern US system was not justly serving our people. There were too many cases pending without resolution. So as judges, we adopted a Navajo Nation peacemaking manual that reflected the peacemaking practice of our ancestors. Our revival of peacemaking led to 25 peacemakers, men and women, handled many different cases. We used the fundamental law of the Dene, the Nebe Behez Ani, to resolve problems consistent with our ancestors. The impact of this restoration of peacemaking was given, had to be given momentum to the revival of the use of the fundamental law of our ancestors. The US system still embedded in the Navajo Nation. But we now have a peacemaking program, which we call as the original dispute resolution, ODR, not ADR, alternative dispute resolution. Thank you.
Go ahead, Sonya.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Justice Yazzie. So what a pleasure to follow you and be sandwiched between two of my favorite people, Malachi and Justice Yazzie. So I'm really blessed to be here. You know, when you start thinking, I'm going to tell this story, and then of course, Justice Yazzie starts, and I'm going in a completely different direction now, but I wanted to share sort of one thing that we work really, really deeply on, and also my own connection, my deeper connection to it. And I've been thinking a lot about I think what Justice Yazzie really intimates is a bigger umbrella of peacemaking, or call it restorative justice or whatever it is. But there's a way in cross-culturally, cross-traditionally, cross-historically, we can find our ways into anyone and any community who chooses to do it differently, to chooses to truly work on resolving some harm, some conflicts, some things outside a system. And the Dene have, really led that way. Recently, being more in touch with some folks in India and really learning about some of their practices, I've come across people who are really closer to their indigenous roots of what this looks like. And a few examples. One is I came across a young man from the northern part of India, Nagaland, and he said that when there's a big dispute in their community, they don't actually even talk about it. They actually hold a party. And in their party, people basically sit together for 2 days, and the person who is sort of the most resource rich throws the party, and they just be together for 2 days. And that being together resolves the tension that's going on in the community. So this idea of restorative justice, or it has to look a certain way, is so nuanced, and it's so intertwined within and embedded in a cultural context. Oftentimes, I think what happens to us in the urban area is we hear these sort of tribal indigenous stories and go kind of freak out and go like, well, I don't know what to do. Like, I live in New York, or I live in California, and that's not how we work here. But the essence of taking what is the most urban form of this idea of the alternative, the idea of looking inside yourself and your community to resolve harm, and how do we apply that kind of in an urban setting? So something that we do that I know some of our other brothers and sisters like Malachi does is that we have a whole process we call restorative justice in the community. And we basically take every single person's call, anybody who reaches out to us who has an impulse to say, hey, I don't know what I need, but I'm trying to do something differently. Can you help me? I might be a survivor. I might be someone who's done harm. I might be someone who's witnessed something. I might be an organization. I don't know what to do. And we take those calls and we see if it's appropriate to work it into some sort of restorative process. Most of the time, a lot of the times it's support for the survivors. A lot of times it's been support and accountability and healing support for people who've done harm. It's been understanding who you are as the outsider looking into something that might be going on. It might be referrals to therapy. It might be referrals to the health system. But the essence of it is that we're trying to create something outside the criminal legal system to actually address the harm that's happening in a community in the way that it's coming to us, whether it's by phone, by email, by text, however people are reaching out. So I feel like, I just want to say that anytime anyone reaches out to do it differently, it's a win. That impulse to try it differently and do it differently is sort of a win. So that's the story I wanted to start with.
Thank you, Sonya. And I think that really helps us reflect on how restorative justice and these processes help us think differently about what the outcomes should be and what we're looking for, right? Which is very different from the current system that we have now. Malachi, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. And Sonya, so I gotta piggyback off of you real quick. And this is like, in my opinion, when I look at society and how it tries to separate us. So you look a certain way, you talk a certain way, you have this amount of money, right? So many different ways, like try to break us apart, separate us. So when I see us coming together, right, we having a party, as Sonya spoke about, whether we dance, laugh, eat together, all of these things, in my opinion, that's restorative justice. So it don't have to just look a certain way, for sure. But I definitely have a story as well, doing community restorative justice out here in Oakland. There's this lady who I'm known for a couple years now, and her son was murdered several years ago. And she came to the council wanting to have an event and ceremony to honor her son's life. And so when we did that, she felt so touched by it that she decided to actually join the North Oakland Restorative Justice Council and being part of what we're doing in North Oakland. And when she came on board, I never tried to like tell her about, oh, think about this, the people who harmed your son in this way, and perhaps there's this process that you can have. I never once like pushed that on her. I didn't even talk about her. I consciously just I consciously stood back from that and just allowed the process to take itself naturally. So it took some years of her being in the community, taking a part of events, coming to restorative justice training, and kind of like getting all of this to the point to where she said, you know what, Malachi, I want to write a letter. I want to write a letter to the person who killed my son. And she wrote the letter, she showed it to me. And in this letter, she talked about forgiveness. But I know restorative justice isn't about forgiveness per se, but that's what she mentioned in her letter. And it was so beautiful for me to see, because I didn't even know that she was at that point yet, because we tried to have an event at a specific park. And at this park, she identified this park as the location where the people hang out that killed her son. And she didn't want to have the event there. You know, and so I didn't know where she was, but she wrote this letter. She went into the courtroom, and I was present along with some others, and she really spoke, and she was in tears, but she spoke and she forgave the person. And so just with that alone, in this process, just letting things play out, letting it take its course naturally, she came to this powerful moment where she actually can do something that she probably never imagined. But there's a however to this, and I'm gonna end right there because I don't want to take too much time. The however is that the district attorney, because of the district attorney's negligence, she read the letter to the wrong person. The letter she read the letter to the person who didn't pull the trigger. And the DA did not let her know that. The DA just let her read and finish the letter. And when she found out, you know, it was really, really hard for her. But I just hold on to the moment of her being brave and courageous and coming to this moment in her life that she was willing to go forth with that. And so she's in good spirits now. That was some time ago, and she's still a part of the council to this day. Yeah.
Thank you for that story, Malachi. And I'm going to stay on you if that's okay, because you were just speaking to this issue of how restorative justice is so different from what the current system has to offer. And your story just illuminates that. And so I'm wondering if you could talk to us about your work in North Oakland and in building these types of communities, and how you're trying to make something different from what we currently have right now.
Definitely. I must admit that it's challenging. It's not easy. You know, I think there are people who just so used to what they know and what they grew up, what they learned about how to deal with certain things. And so we have like this definitely punitive culture. But you know, when in the process, like we definitely you know, bring trainings, bring events and conversations to where we actually can open up and learn about this new way of being and seeing. Right. And so that's one of the things that we love throwing events, because it's based upon relationship building and neighbors getting to know each other. And so we often hear about gentrification, and I know that's going on in LA and different parts of this country. And so you have so many neighbors or people moving in that come from different cultural backgrounds, and to where they have the old residents. And so we have these conversations, we have these events where people can get to know each other and how to bring resources to these communities. And we try to do it in a way that isn't relying upon city government and police. So how can we get to know each other as a community, and how can we address needs and responsibilities? And so we also often have these conversations. And so when anything happens in the community, we know the people that's in the community that's willing to engage using restorative justice principles. And so this has been going on for several years now. It's not necessarily where I would like it to be or where I would want it to be, but normally like we get emails or calls when there's a shooting where there's a conflict between neighbors, and we figure out a way to the best of our ability to be able to approach that. And just like Sonya said, sometimes, you know, it may just be support for the person that was harmed, or support for the person who caused the harm. And so it may just look like that. But we're still growing, and Oakland is dope. Oakland is dope. There's so many other people engaging in this specific way of being, and I'm really appreciative of it.
Thank you. And Sonya, I'm going to turn to you, and similar question. Also, how do you work to incorporate this into your everyday life to just even change your way of being in the world?
Yeah, you know, I think it's sort of like from the cellular level, kind of ground up. Like if I'm not doing what you know, we're talking about, then it doesn't make any sense to me. So like, what does it mean at every level, from my, you know, relationships to my kids, to our staff and our core family, to, you know, out there in the world, that we're trying, you know, with all of our human errors and complexity, to kind of walk our talk, to resolve things that happen when we experience harm, or when we have conflict, or when we feel shame, or when we are experiencing trauma, or whatever it is that we do. So I feel like there's this like very inside out, you know, very sort of inner outer relationship that has been around for a long time. You think, look at spiritual traditions, they often talk about, His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks about, you can't do the outer work until you do the inner work. So it's not a foreign idea, that this principle has to be rooted in that. I think also, like, you know, sort of starting an organization, I definitely didn't intend it. It was sort of we're doing a project, it turned into an organization. But then in that work is so much culture building. It's so much about, you know, like being with people in relationship and creating a culture where the conditions with which we work is about kind of really being rooted in transforming harm, in accountability, in being trauma informed, in compassion, in being non-shaming, you know, and non-judgmental, in having agency, you know, and these things, because they're not a part of our broader culture. We don't come from these 500 years, or probably we did with the indigenous folks here, but after colonization, the culture wasn't rooted in compassion. It wasn't rooted in understanding. It was rooted in good and bad, you know, evil, good, right or wrong, you know, hell and heaven. So that kind of puritanical value system is not the value system that we're used to, at least in the West, the folks that are, you know, sort of not indigenous from the West. So how do we create the return to those values, right? We're talking about the return to compassion, the return to interdependence, the return to belonging, the return to not being judgmental, the return to seeing ourselves as a part of a network, like a really intricate part of an interdependent network, where every single thing we do matters and every relationship that we have matters. I've been in long relationships with these two people on the screen, you know, and it's not just willy-nilly. It's very intentional. It's very important, and it's what will change things. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. And it's really reminding me, I think this was getting passed around an article about the importance of friendship and returning to friends as our primary relationship, and not always thinking about intimate partners, and how can we be more intentional about creating and building even just our friendships. So that just really made me think of that reorientation as well. Justice Yazzie, based on what Sonya just spoke about, what are some of the barriers getting in the way in terms of this return to compassion, this return to interdependence? And specifically, what do you see as some of the barriers within the law in terms of being able to return to a different way of being?
Well, we look at the fundamental principles that move our peacemaking. in the way that it does. So in our Navajo way, we have to look at nature and remember what we have learned from nature. And so sometimes very difficult to teach those ways, because the only way to access what nature can give you is through prayers and songs, through the language, through the culture. And sometimes very difficult to do that. So one of the things that gives us a sense of security, a sense that we know what happened at creation time and on down to into today's world. And one of the things that are very necessary that we learn from nature is tradition. And when we talk about tradition, we have to look to the earth. We have to look for a direction. We have to look to the mountain and to the water, let's say in the east, to say this is our thought piece. Then we have to move that thought piece into the south and say, what do we learn from the south? Is we learn the thought has an action, like planning. What's the problem? What's the plan? What do relatives have to do to make things better? And then and the older people always say, is there a life in what you're attempting to do? The law that you pass, is there life in it? So we always remember that from the West, where there was where we see, round and about various variegated vegetation. So that's a reminder that there's life, there's air, and there's also hope in the northern way, in the northern direction. There's fire, there's stones. So we have all this in the ceremonies. So you ask the question, how do you deal with the difficult problems of today? We have to remember our tradition, our custom. And here, what I'm saying is that what I just said about the different direction is the first law the holy people put in our hand and said, this is your responsibility. You are made as the Net people. Always remember these laws that we just talked about are instituted in each one of you, and you are one with that law. And so today some of us are still living that way with these laws to carry on the balance, to carry on the harmony and peace within ourselves. And we want to do that even more with our relatives in our community. So one of the things that we do have a strong tradition, but there's a dilemma that's historical. It presents trauma. So because of that, many of us have become disconnected with tradition. Like I said, the United States had a strong way to impose assimilation among the Navajo people, which caused, to become distance from our culture. And because of that, we don't remember. We have forgotten the memory of what the holy people put in our hands. But even then, we look at nature, we look at the fire, the water, and so we still remember. We can still remember. We'll find our cultural principle does make a difference. For example, our clanship is very powerful still. We still live with it. We still practice the relationship. So we are reminded that we are means we are related to everything in life. And remembering that, maybe no matter how something may be of a difficult situation, we remember that we have to treat everybody, no matter how they treat, no matter how somebody tries to harm you, tries to think less of you. But this tradition, I'm telling you, the relationship that was taught by the holy people to you, even somebody who really hates you, you would say, you're my relative. I have a duty, I have a responsibility to treat you with as though you are my relative, with respect and with honor. And we got to remember that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful reminder for all of us. And Sonya or Malachi, if you want to chime in, just thinking about how these practices and these ways of being that Justice Yazzie is talking about, and that you all have talked about, within the legal institution, oftentimes people say, oh, this is so touchy-feely, this is so nebulous, this is so abstract, how do you actually do this? How do you actually make this work? And I'm wondering if you can, any one of you, if you can speak to what you've seen in terms of, actually passing on these skills, reconnecting with our history, with our culture and tradition, as Justice Yazzie mentioned, and how that actually has impacted people's ability to prevent harm and violence.
Okay, I'll jump in, and then Malachi, you jump in, please. I think, in a 1 hour panel, like we talk about like lofty ideas and, kind of visions and sort of methodology gets lost a little bit, but like they're really concrete things that we do every day. It's not just like we go off and walk around going woo woo, we need to all like do these things. So for us, they can take many forms, right? Everything from we do face-to-face dialogues with post-incarcerated, like post-charged in prison, people who are survivors who reach out, folks who've done pretty severe harm. We'll do those one-on-one face-to-face dialogues. We're one of those folks that do it in California. We'll do circles on the outside for survivors. We'll do circles with people who are coming out. We have this RJ and community process, right, which leads to direct dialogues, or they lead to different kinds of processes depending on what happens. We do a lot of sort of groups, with people who are incarcerated around deep healing and accountability work, to sort of really recognize the causes of why somebody might have committed a crime and how to work towards, just understanding and connecting the dots of that that led to the harm that was caused. We do a lot of work with survivors just in terms of different support cycles, support groups and things like that. So whether it's like a sort of a circular group shape of a community conversation, or whether it's like a one-on-one dialogue, we kind of meet the moment, with what we've got. So that for us, it depends on the community that we're intersecting with, and sometimes it's inside prison, and sometimes it's outside in the community, and sometimes it's people who are reaching out. We have a reentry house that's based in Oakland. It's become a little bit of a center spot for us in terms of people who are coming through and sort of what people need. So I see a question in the chat about sort of big cities and what do you do? And I think there's so many ways that it might be difficult to tap into like your neighbor down the street or next door. But there can be a really deep network of people that are doing this kind of work that you just draw more and more people in. I think Malachi's work in North Oakland is really amazing in terms of the way they've drawn people in. And so I'll stop there. See, we'll say more.
Yeah, I think it's a process, and just thinking about the history of Oakland, and I think about Fanya's story, Fanya Davis, and how they not just Fanya but others, Rita Alford, other people who helped to bring restorative justice in Oakland schools. I hear about it, and that probably was, I can be wrong, 2007. And restorative justice probably wasn't as popular in Oakland at the time. I'm not sure. But I look at where it is now, and so now it's 2021, and so it's been 14 years since that point, if I'm correct. And it's a process. It'll just take people who decide to come together and start. If it's 2 or 3 people just come together in their community, then maybe their neighbors in a certain area, they start a meeting, start talking about it, and figure out ways to engage with the community, and then it can grow, it can take shape. And so from that time when Fanya Davis and I'm not for sure who everyone was a part of that, and now you see so many people coming to Oakland to learn about restorative justice in schools. Now you hear about it throughout the United States. And I'm not even saying it started in Oakland schools, like in Oakland specifically, but just in general. And so from the time when we started talking about it to now, like I do believe that it's come a long way. And to the point about you made about some people think it's touchy-feely, or maybe they have some disagreement about restorative justice. Oftentimes I think, I wonder, is there fear in opening up? fear in one having to look at themselves, or fear of change because someone may benefit from this, or et cetera. That's often what comes up for me. But what I learned, man, it's. I remember the first time I sat in circle. I know Sonya is familiar with this. The first time that I ever had to share about the worst thing that I ever did in my life, it was so scary, and I was drenched in sweat. And after I shared that, I felt like I made a huge mistake. That was one of the hardest days of my life when I was incarcerated, when I shared that. And so for me, restorative justice is not easy, but it is transformative, in my opinion.
Thank you for sharing that, Malachi. And can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in schools and when you face that resistance? I've done restorative justice work in schools, and it is really hard for the reasons that you just stated. And then also working with younger people, who may not be used to sharing their feelings or may feel ashamed to do so. Can you talk a little bit about how it works in schools and what you're doing?
I personally don't work in the schools. I have done circles in the schools and did trainings, but I was never like a coordinator in the schools. But I hear stories from some of my fellow colleagues about the challenges that they face, and often what I hear is two things, probably even more. But do the principal buy into it? And if the principal doesn't buy in, it can be really challenging just having this whole shift in culture in schools. And so that's a challenge if the principal doesn't buy in. And also too, you have to think about, like, it's so many different students and faculty and teachers that's there, and things are always happening, and you have one coordinator per school. And probably not even every school. So oftentimes what I hear from the colleagues about, they said this word about firefighting, that's putting out certain fires and moving around. And I'm just not so sure about it. I mean, I don't know how to speak to it as my colleagues would, but those are some of the challenges that I hear that arises in schools. And also too, another thing is suspensions. Are there moments where you have to suspend? Like, there, even as a restorative justice person, I hear about that when someone who don't want to have a process, don't want to engage with it, but did do something. What do you do? And so there's some sort of like gray area. I have my thoughts about it, but I'm gonna be silent on it for now.
Well, and I think what you're bringing up is that I think oftentimes people turn to us who do restorative justice work to have all the answers, right? And we're not saying that we have all the answers. We're saying we're trying things, we're working it out, we're working together on this to try to come to a communal solution. And this is, again, open to anyone who wants to jump in, but talk more about that working with community to build community so that we can try these things out. What experiments are you all engaging in? What new things are you trying out to see if they work in response to what kinds of incidents? I want to hear all the interesting things y'all are doing to try all this out and be innovative and creative.
Alicia, I can, make a comment here. Okay. Look at the philosophy and the practice with peacemaking issues, especially to the problems of the community. Some places, there's a lot of concern about violence, especially when the violence takes place and then it's addressed correctly, or not addressed at all. So one day I was walking, I met an elderly man who just right outside the Navajo court. And he approached me and he said to me, which means that my home is in disarray. My children, grandchildren fight all the time. They don't listen to me. He says, I need to do something to bring order to my home and among my relatives. So somebody's saying this is very common. And I, as a judge, what am I to do? So when I hear these concerns and walk to certain communities, the only thing I can conclude is that the Navajo Nation justice system is broken. Here we look at peacemaking is something that gives people the opportunity to talk things out, work things out, to put the relationship back together, to maintain strong relationship ties. And we always remember what remembering, Bainini, remember, means that sometimes people will say, our ancestors have always used peacemaking to maintain peace and harmony. And that's the only way they kept stability and solidarity in their relationship. The key is relationship, to resolve whatever problem they may. You may be in court in a serious, charge, but if you manage somehow to work through the relationship, guess what? Once you can mend the relationship, you've done a lot to problem resolution. So one of the things that as a judge, developing more peacemaking to bring more security and safety to the people, to the families, is something that we need to do, something that as Navajo people we need to do. So I see myself as a lawyer. I see myself as a judge, but I am a peacemaker. And so as such, as a peacemaker, I see the need to reconnect to ourselves, to our culture. We need to learn, we need to teach our core values to all our people. Our legal system remains very adversarial, and some of us are very used to that. We need to make more room for peacemaking, growth for peacemaking at the grassroots level, and to give people the chance to take on the responsibility to take care of issues and situations that lead to violence. And I know the people are very interested in doing that, giving them the opportunity to have a part in the problem resolution, gives them a sense of good life, a sense of satisfaction, a sense of resilience. So in meantime, it would be well just to look at another matter. Navajo leadership should respond to the needs of the people the way in which the holy people have wished us to be, to use the power of what we know, to use our mind, put it into action to sustain life, to see what the people have to say about, what that can bring about hope within themselves, just as what our ancestors did in the past.
I could just add a little bit about, I think one thing that we do quite a lot of, which is maybe a little different area, is around just sort of the interventions or the intersection with sexual harm. People often don't want to talk about sexual violence. They don't want to see it in this context. It doesn't have the same space in kind of the criminal justice reform conversations. We don't see violence against women or women identified or female identified folks, trans identified folks as real violence. We don't think men ever get violated, in a sexual way. So there's just all this kind of invisibility around sexual violence that also topples, it sort of creates and recreates the cycle of silence and shame that is experienced by both survivors and also people who've done harm to actually come forward and start to deal with it. And so we do a lot of work with folks who've done sexual harm. It's difficult work. It's the most sort of shameful, secretive work. And I think that's a big part of a unique, I think, intervention or sort of a way in for us. Same thing with just, having that work done with survivors as well. And there are these two questions that are floating around on the Q&A that I wanted to speak to something, because I was thinking a lot about, given that you're UCLA Law School, that this is sort of a law school panel, and what's the law school intervention, right? Or what do you do as a lawyer? I have no idea, because I'm not a lawyer. And I have chosen not to be for this reason, and seem to work with a lot of recovering lawyers. So I can imagine that when you're involved in any system, that there's a big question about who am I in the context of this system, and that constant grappling with who am I in the context of the system is so important to the work that y'all do. And I've been thinking about, like, for example, with this restorative justice in the community piece, there's like two huge things that we need that really probably lawyers could do, or people that are involved in sort of policy work that really understand the legal system. One is like, can we create, this is just an example, like I've been talking a lot about how do we create protection for people out in the community who want to come forward, but are afraid to come forward because if they share that they've done a harm, the possibility of being prosecuted is always like this thing that's really real hanging over someone's head that won't allow them to actually come forward and feel like they can say that they did something. And are there ways that we can create sort of these protections, these places of confidentiality where we can actually do these processes? That seems like a really specific, incredibly important intervention that a restorative justice-y type, legally type, lawyerish type, policy-ish type person at UCLA Law School could do, And so I think it's like, and for some of us who, like, where we feel very like, oh, the system just told us no, so I guess we just have to like work around it, and I don't know how to deal with this. I feel incredibly intimidated by trying to find like points where you can push in the legal system. But when I talk to people that are lawyers that have been through law school, they don't seem to have as much intimidation. And I think there's a certain training that comes, from learning the system, where you can find these points of intervention that can be so incredibly helpful. And it's really about like kind of people working more deeply with community to figure out what this looks like. For another example is that survivors should never be in, like, we should not have this intertwining between the DA's office and survivors of crime. There should be a place where survivors are outside of those sort of spaces, right? So how do we do that? Another example is that survivors can't necessarily talk to the people who've done harm, even if they want to, after they get out. Why is that there? It seems like a really simple sort of legal fix, right? To say, can we change the law so that the people who actually want to talk to each other can talk to each other? So, like, example, I could probably rattle off about 10 other things. And I think if you talk to these other folks, they could rattle off 10 other things. So I think there's something about being in deep context with communities that are trying to do this work and figuring out like where we can push, because we need everybody. We really, really do. We really need like all the legal folks to be pushing on the system to be able to take these things apart, especially when folks in community don't have the bandwidth or know how to do that. So.
Thanks, Sonya. And just a quick plug that we are working with some students on the confidentiality piece and some legislation around restorative justice. So anyone who's on and is interested at UCLA Law, feel free to reach out. I am going to turn to some of the audience questions because they're really wonderful and juicy. So this is for any of the panelists. So the first one is, it seems like restorative justice emphasizes fluidity, which is so different from the rigid procedure associated with US law. Do you think legal procedure is inherently incompatible with restorative justice, or is it something that can be adapted to embrace restorative justice principles? Whoever would like.
Give a brief note on that. Kind of looked at what the situation now and the future, and what we're talking about. The issues, some are very complicated, and I'm very hard to be with Malachi and Sonya, and I even though I'm talking about maybe somewhat different issues than the big city, but one thing I worry about much in relation to what you're talking about is our language is diminishing. And that if our language goes, so goes our culture. So I always remember the quote from Chief Manuelito. He was one leader who helped negotiate our own people with the U.S. government in 1868. What he said to me, "Akahila," means don't ever, Sha'achin, my children, don't ever forget wherever you may go, wherever you may be, never forget the power of your language, your prayers, songs, and culture. So to me, when this is said, I look to the leadership of the Navajo Nation. And when I say leadership, I'm talking about people who make laws, like council delegates, judges who make decisions, lawyers. We have lots of non-Navajo lawyers, and they love to push their own way, their own style of justice, argue procedures that come from the big city. Doesn't make sense. But I think that there's things begin to change here. That if you want to be a lawyer, a practicing lawyer on the reservation, you have to look at the Neba Behaz'ane, the fundamental law. And if you want to take leadership, guess what? You have to learn the law, the Nel law, the Navajo law. You have to teach, to apply, and to share with the Neba Behaz'ane to the people you assist. And there's one decision where a non-Indian lawyer was disbarred because he wouldn't do what he was ordered to do. So the Supreme Court of the Navajo Nation said that from this day forth you shall uphold the fundamental law of the Dene. So, and the court ordered that and said as an opinion, the court ordered the lawyer to observe the duty to assist the Navajo courts to protect, to enhance the fundamental law of the people. The duty is for all those who are in position in position of leadership to do the same, to honor and respect the Neba Behaz'ane. Why am I saying that over and over? Because that is something that will change our way of helping people with the laws that apply in the Navajo Nation. Like to say that if lawyers become more aware, have more respect for the learning of Navajo, then they will be in position to work with each other to see what is what remedies available in peacemaking, what remedy is available in the adversarial system, and maybe look for a common ground to learn how to deal with the harder issues, sexual molestation, and be able to involve the people at the same time. So I think once we're able to do that, we are getting somewhere in terms of giving justice to what I was just talking about. Some of the older people says we want more. We want more for our children, the safety and security. So I think so when I talk about by invitation here, the Navajo peacemaking, I see great growth in the restorative justice. Once upon a time, I didn't see any restorative justice anywhere, and then 10 days later, then I see there was a seed planted, and it started to grow. So I just wanted to conclude by saying that the National Restorative Justice movement is rooted in the indigenous cultural worldview and practice. And I think that's something to remember. Thank you.
Thank you. Then the next question is, how can restorative justice help when a corporation is causing harm or was injured themselves? It seems tough to scale when you have commercially interested parties beholden to fiduciary duties to pursue valid claims for their principles. So kind of thinking about harm on a much larger scale, or harm in a different way, do you see a place for restorative justice in those types of incidents?
we short answer. We have a lot of non-Indian business doing business in Navajo country. And one of them is the Progressive Insurance. And what Progressive Insurance did, and this is a good case for peacemaking, because there was a suit against the Progressive Insurance where they refused to pay. I mean, the injured party had claimed for a lot more, and the lawyer who represented them had good evidence to prove that they deserve a lot more in terms of remedy. But they didn't want to acknowledge the law of the Navajo Nation. They didn't want to be subjected to the law of the Navajo Nation. They say that, you know, the Navajo Nation does not have jurisdiction. And so they continuously go to federal court to say that, you know, the state law should apply instead, not the Navajo Nation. Just because we're non-Indian, just because we are citizens of the state, and any litigation that we have in the Indian country should not be given any deference. So I think in cases like this, if there's a way that the corporation can be persuaded that there's a lot of a good outcome if the matter can be settled. I mean, so in some cases that has been done, and so people were able to reduce the length of litigation, and also the clients were able to save a lot of money. And so I think some of the corporations were open to peacemaking, and which is good. And I think more and more of this type of process should be done. Thank you.
And I just want to add to that question, because, you know, there are instances in which restorative practices and tools have been used to address historic racial harms, right? Really historically systematic takings from people. And so just curious if any of you have experience doing that, or think that is a tool and a way to seek justice through these types of principles. So we think about truth and reconciliation commissions. We've had some of those types of processes in the US as well. And so what you think about using these tools to address these systemic harms? Sonya or Malachi?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking about this. I mean, I think there's a really big difference between a corporation embedded in like capitalist hierarchical values, which are pretty antithetical to like more interdependent sort of equity values, right? So, you know, is somebody doing something because they want somebody to go away, you know, because they want it to be like, what's the real reason why a corporation would agree to something? So I feel a bit skeptical, you know, to be frank, of like, kind of like, well, let's apply it here and let's apply it there and let's do this, when it's like, well, the idea of a corporation is not for the benefit of, it's for gain, it's for, you know, it's for capitalism and modernity. So that's problematic in itself, right? But I think that's really different from historical harms and structural harm when we're talking about, you know, groups and groups and groups of people realizing that the system, you know, and the whole history of, you know, genocide and colonization was not okay. And I think, you know, I think there should be so much more of that. That's all I have to say about that. You know, that's it.
Definitely agree. I did not, I mean, in my mind, it was a definitely, it wasn't a challenging question, so to speak, but it's hard for me to see that possibilities exist. I think when it comes to people, it exists, but corporations, it's tough because we had certain, like, at least government agencies reach out to us And when they reached out and we started initial conversations, it never fell through. We never came to anything because of these interests. And so that's what I'm seeing. I did want to comment about like the lawyers and their role and what can they do. And I look at my personal life. And so I didn't share this, but I was tried as an adult and sentenced to 15 years to life. And so I've been through the criminal justice system and the juvenile courts all the way to the adult courts. And one of the reasons that I'm out right now is because of a lady named Elizabeth Calvin and others who decided they wanted to change some policies around how we how we deal with young people, right? And when she started, nothing was falling through, nothing was coming to be, but she stayed consistent. And decades later, probably was decades, I'm not sure. All of a sudden, you start seeing these changes, and that language and all this awareness helped to impact for me being out here today. And there was an attorney who decided to come to San Quentin, sit down and listen to our stories, heard my story, and decided to represent me for free because I couldn't afford it. And I had a state appointed I don't know if they call it public defenders or would not represent me in my first parole hearing. But because this lawyer who came in decided to support me for free, it helped me to be out here to this very day. And her name is Heidi. And I'm not for sure if she's still working with USC. And I know there's a UCLA, USC little rivalry. But when it comes to restorative justice, no rivalry. But she supported me, and she's like one of the reasons why I'm out. And so what I get from that is, even though I believe that this system is rooted in racism and in capitalism, I do believe since we have people that's inside, since we have people outside that's impacted by these systems, there's always a way to kind of engage at some specific angle. There's a way. And so it's like following your heart and letting it guide you to the point where you can support this movement that we are in.
Can I just add one thing? By the way, Heidi is on is a panelist, is whatever, she's attending. So you can give her a big shout out. I saw her name through this screen, but I think that there's something in what Malachi is saying also is that like anytime that we're taking power away from the system and giving it back to the people, like that's what we want, right? So there's so much room for lawyers to do that, you know, and it's such unseen work in so many ways. So there's a really beautiful, you know, Rebecca Solnit's written a beautiful Hope in the Dark, right? It's all about sort of these different social change things. But she has this one story where she talks about a mountain that still exists, but nobody knows about all of the action work and the legalities that went to saving that mountain, right? Nobody knows all the fights that were had so that that mountain wasn't mined. And I think what people can do to like stop bad legislation, to protect good legislation, to push these things forward, like what happened with Malachi, it's just such an important part of how we see the line between not giving more power to the system, but taking it away and chipping at it. And I think sometimes only people who are embedded in that system to a certain extent understand the law can do some of those things. And then folks on the outside do other of those things. And I think that's really the key in my mind.
Just have one other note to add. Earlier, I was saying that restorative justice means the people, not the courts, own and resolve their own problems. I had two cases. One of them is, in both cases, the P&M of the electric company wanted to renewal of easement through Indian land, but the people who live there objected. So both sides hired a lawyer, and they hired me to come as a peacemaker. And so the experience here, what we're talking about, you know, how does peacemaking play out when you face a corporation? It's very clear that, you know, when you're trained as a lawyer, you act as a lawyer. You think like a lawyer. You always think in the box. But when you're a peacemaker, you think outside the box. And what I have to say to the lawyers is, you know, if you expect some resolution with the local people who will give you easement, you know, we don't want lawyers in this the conversation. We need the one person who would represent the corporation, not a lawyer. We need the people who are living there to be a part of the process. So that's the only way. And the people there, they know, they have a good idea of what they want. They know the definition of equity. So I had another case that I was called to do peacemaking in the state court in the Indian Child Welfare Act case. It involved a white woman who adopted a Navajo child. And then the other side was the grandparents of the Navajo child. So here we were to decide, and day one, all the people, the caseworkers, the lawyers, and the experts came. And the only thing is to say, if we're going to do peacemaking in this state pending case, no lawyers, no judges, just facilitators. Your facilitator means that you allow the people to talk to each other. Let them, you know, reach a resolution. Whatever they say becomes the decision of their decision to be, you know, known to the court. So I think we need a more of this kind of effort to give some real credibility and deference to a peacemaking process, restorative justice process.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a huge shift that would need to take place in the way that law schools teach, right? Because it's really about, in some ways, law schools and the legal academy teach us how to hoard power. And what you all just spoke to is really about giving it back and chipping away at it and shifting power. And what role can we all play in doing that? And I think learning restorative and peacemaking practices allow us to decenter ourselves and really think about the people most impacted and most harmed in any given incident. So I'm going to ask a final question to close us out. And that is, what are your hopes for peacemaking, for restorative justice? What makes you excited about this field, this arena, this practice, these skills? And what do you hope to see more of in the next, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? And maybe Justice Yazzie, will start with you and then go around.
Okay, thank you. What I hope in just looking at the peacemaking practice here locally, I wish we do have a peacemaking process under the Navajo Nation government. But to me, I don't want to work over there, because working with the government means bureaucrat. And so if you want to really plant the seed, it has to be done with the grassroots people. And the grassroots people need to be taught, if you want to do a process, we have to learn it together. And I think more and more that this kind of dialogue needs to be made. I think we need to bring different people from different places like law school, government, Navajo land, and this big city, the Black community, Latino community, bring them together, and let's talk about what is peacemaking. What does the process look like, and what should we aim at? And one of them is, people who are going to law school. Are they only going to learn the black letter law and learn how to analyze issues on a Navajo Nation one way, or are they going to open, put the box aside and look at what we have here and learn from the indigenous people? What is peacemaking? What does the process look like? And if you really do, you can really learn a process that you can be taught based on the wisdom of the people, but based on the experience of the people.
Yeah, I probably have bigger than 5-year goals. I think I want to see, I want to see us return to interdependence and compassion. And, I think that like all of this is rooted in such deeper consciousness and deeper values. And like from that springs such different thinking and such different ways of being in the world and acting with each other. There's another woman I came across from a tribal community in Mysore, and she said that there's such a strong sense of interdependence with nature in their community that they have very little land disputes that actually go to the courts, because in the end of the day, they know that they don't own the land and the land doesn't own them. So that something stops that taking it forward to the court, right? And people are able to sort of deal with the land dispute. So what happens when that sense of interdependence with nature is so embedded in you that you're like, wait, this land dispute doesn't make any sense because it's in a fundamental contradiction to my value system, you know? And so maybe that's, I have hope for us, you know, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 50 years, but like that shift of consciousness is not just an out there philosophy. It intricately changes the nature of conflict in itself and the nature of like harm that happens. And I think that we have the capacity to do that. We just have to, like Justice said, we have to remember. We have to remember that we have that capacity to do it. And I think that to me, that's the key. I have a person I've quoted many times before. His name is Jayesh Bhai, and he said, act with the patience of the urgency of tomorrow and the patience of 1,000 years. So what does that look like if we have that patience of 1,000 years and the urgency of tomorrow? So that's it for me.
I have two things that's coming up for me right now. And one of the things, Alicia, you actually mentioned it too. I remember Fanya speaking, and she said, there's always something next. And she was speaking towards like from slavery to sharecropping, Jim Crow, segregation, mass incarceration. It's like it's always something. And then what she speak to is like, because we haven't dealt with race in America. And so I know there's people working on it. You have coming to the table. You have there's people doing work around racial healing in America. But I really hope to see that grow. And what I'm hoping not to see is that this someone tries to run for president or wins the presidency. But we don't have to talk about that right now. But I'm hoping to see that these processes happen and people kind of come together to work towards that. Another thing that I would like to see more conversations around, and I'm not sure if everybody agree with it, is this restorative economics conversation. And just it's so many impacted people just living in poverty, and poverty is a big thing, you know. And it's hard to like get out of certain things when like everybody, especially during these times of COVID and a lack of opportunity. And dealing with it now in the community is hard. And so like, how do we come together to build an economy that isn't rooted in capitalism, but on meeting people's needs and also bringing joy to their lives? And so I hope there's more conversations about restorative economics.
Thank you all so much for all of the wisdom that you brought, all of the invitations for us to take this on, to have critical self-awareness, to connect back to our histories, to ask ourselves, who am I in the context of the system, to ask ourselves, does the law have life in it, to ask ourselves, how can we apply these principles to every aspect of our life, including the economic system that we live under. I just appreciate this conversation so much, and all of you so much for everything that you give to this world and to the people around you and everyone who is here today. So thank you to our panelists and our audience, and hopefully we'll see everybody at the next one on Friday. The registration link is in the chat. Thank you all, and have a good rest of your day.